London, 1940. Under the burning sky of the Blitz, as Britain stood inches from collapse, one quiet scientist carried the only plan that could save a dying empire. His name was Henry Tizzard. Chemist, engineer, strategist, and the man who believed something no general dared say aloud. Science, not courage, would decide the war. While bombs fell over London and the Luftwaffe erased entire streets in minutes, Tizard watched the flames with a cold, analytical calm. Britain did not have enough planes, factories, or pilots to win a long conflict. It needed something the enemy couldn't copy, technology powerful enough to shift the balance overnight. Tizzard had spent years warning military leaders that modern war would be governed by machines, measurements, and calculations. He understood physics as deeply as he understood geopolitics. The world was entering an era where empires would be shaped not by generals but by laboratories. And Britain, exhausted and outnumbered, had only one advantage left: a handful of secret inventions so advanced they looked like science fiction. Radar that could see enemy aircraft long before they arrived. A magnetron capable of generating microwaves thousands of times more powerful than anything that existed. Early jet propulsion concepts. New anti-submarine technologies. Primitive but promising research on atomic energy. These were not just inventions, and they were the keys to survival, but Tizzard knew something terrifying. Britain alone could not produce them fast enough. The population was small. The industry was limited. German factories ran day and night, backed by a continent under their control. Even with superior technology, Britain would be crushed simply by scale. What Tizzard proposed next was so unprecedented that senior officers called it madness. He suggested giving all of Britain's secret weapons, every blueprint, every document, every classified device, to the United States. For free, no conditions, no negotiation. Just hand over a century of scientific advantage and hope America used it before the Axis powers reached global dominance. To the British government, this was unthinkable. To Tizzard, it was inevitable. The idea did not come from desperation, but from logic. He recognized the emerging reality. America had the largest industrial potential in the world. If British science could merge with American production, the Allies could create weapons Germany had no chance of matching. He didn't want an alliance built on diplomacy. He wanted one forged in mathematics, engineering, and physics. A partnership where ideas became machines, and machines became victory. Tizard's approach was brutally simple. Protecting a secret is useless if your nation collapses before you can use it. Sharing everything was the only way to survive. So he began assembling a small group of scientists, engineers, and military officers he trusted completely. Their mission would be unprecedented. Travel to Washington under heavy secrecy and offer the Americans Britain's entire technological arsenal. The fate of the empire would sit inside a single, unremarkable suitcase. But before the mission could begin, Tizzard had to navigate the political minefield at home. Churchill was bold, but cautious. Senior officers doubted the Americans. Intelligence chiefs warned the plan could backfire, and others feared the United States would simply take the technology and leave Britain behind. Yet Tizzard pressed on. He had no illusions. He did not chase glory or recognition. He cared only about what worked, and he knew that Britain alone could not hold off the Axis powers. His confidence came from decades of scientific leadership. Before the war, Tizzard had revolutionized aviation safety with the Tizard barometer and had chaired committees that shaped every major British research program. He believed engineering was a form of national defense. He believed data could save lives, and he believed the job of a scientist was not to impress governments, but to force them to see the truth. Throughout 1940, he watched the Battle of Britain unfold with growing concern. Radar, the technology he had championed long before the war, was saving the Royal Air Force from collapse. It wasn't pilots or luck keeping Britain alive. It was physics, electronics, mathematics. Everything Tizzard had fought to fund and protect. Radar stations detected incoming attacks. scrambled fighters at the perfect moment, and forced the German assault to stretch through longer, more vulnerable paths. Britain survived because of equations, not miracles, but Tizzard knew this was only the beginning. Radar saved the skies, but the oceans, the factories, and the laboratories would require far more. The magnetron, the world's most powerful microwave generator, was the true key to victory. It could shrink radar into compact airborne systems, giving Allied bombers precision the Germans could not defend against. It was, in Tizard's mind, the most valuable object in the entire war, and he was ready to give it away. In late 1940, after months of resistance, the government finally approved the mission. Tizzard packed the magnetron, the blueprints, the research notes, the prototypes, and the future of British science into a locked black suitcase. Then he turned to the small team of engineers and officers who would travel with him. Their orders were simple: give the Americans everything, hold nothing back. The future of the free world depends on it. Before continuing, if you appreciate deep dive documentaries about forgotten engineers who shaped world history, consider liking and subscribing. It helps the channel bring more hidden stories to life. As Tizzard boarded the flight to North America, he knew he was carrying more than technology. He was carrying a bet on cooperation, on reason, on the power of science to unite nations rather than destroy them. But the question followed him across the Atlantic. Was he saving Britain, or surrendering its last secret advantage to a country that had not yet chosen a side? The suitcase Henry Tizzard carried across London in 1940 did not look extraordinary. It was small, black, metal-framed and unmarked, the kind of discreet container a government clerk might use for paperwork. But inside it lay the most valuable scientific treasures Britain had ever produced. Not jewels, not codes, not political files. It contained the technology capable of reshaping the entire Second World War. The magnetron, radar blueprints, jet propulsion research, anti-submarine innovations, and documents outlining the early British program that would eventually lead to nuclear weapons. It was a vault of pure scientific leverage, one that could either save the Allies or hand their enemies an unimaginable advantage if mishandled. Tizzard had spent years preparing for this moment. He knew exactly what would catch the Americans' attention, what would be dismissed, and what would be considered priceless. At the top of the list was a device no larger than a bar of soap, the cavity magnetron. This tiny, copper-coloured instrument was the most powerful microwave generator in the world. British scientists had achieved a breakthrough no one else had come close to matching. They had created a magnetron that output hundreds of watts, soon to be thousands. It could shrink radar from giant ground installations down to compact airborne systems. With it, aircraft could track submarines at night, detect enemy fighters from miles away, and guide bombing raids with never-before-seen accuracy. In simple terms, whoever mastered the magnetron would control the sky and the sea. Then there was Chain Home, the world's first fully operational radar network. Most countries considered radar an experimental curiosity. Britain turned it into a nationwide shield. Towers along the coast fed real-time data to Fighter Command, allowing the RAF to intercept German aircraft long before they reached British cities. It wasn't luck that saved Britain during the Battle of Britain. It was engineering, a web of radio waves and mathematics orchestrated by people like Tizzard. Radar changed the rules of air defence, and now he was prepared to give it all away. The suitcase also held jet engine developments, particularly Frank Whittle's research. Britain lacked the industrial capacity to mass-produce jets, but the ideas were years ahead of anything Germany or America possessed. A jet-powered aircraft could fly higher, faster, and longer than any piston engine fighter. Although the technology was young, its potential was explosive. Combined with American manufacturing, it could accelerate aviation into a new era, one where speed itself became a weapon. Next came anti-submarine warfare innovations, including ASTIC, an early sonar system that allowed ships to detect U-boats underwater. At a time when German submarines threatened to strangle Britain by sinking supply convoys, This technology was indispensable. If the Americans integrated British sonar into their naval production, the Atlantic could be protected far more effectively. And then there was something even more sensitive, something Tizzard debated including at all: elements of the British tube alloys program, early research that laid the foundation for the atomic bomb. Though primitive, the documents revealed that Britain understood nuclear fission's military potential. The notes described isotope separation, chain reactions, and the theoretical energy release of atomic explosions. Nothing was fully realized yet, but it was enough to show the Americans that Britain grasped the stakes. Tizzard didn't hand them the bomb. He handed them the starting line. Each item in the suitcase represented years of intellectual labour, thousands of experiments, countless failures, and breakthroughs achieved under the pressure of looming invasion. Tizard knew these inventions were worth more than any diplomatic negotiation Britain could offer. They were the keys to survival. But none of them mattered if Britain could not build them fast enough. Factories bombed, resources limited, engineers exhausted. The math was simple. Even with superior ideas, Britain was losing the war of production. That was the one equation Tizzard couldn't change, not alone. America, on the other hand, had unlimited manpower, industrial might, and scientific talent. If Britain shared its secrets, America would turn theories into machines, thousands of them. Planes, radars, destroyers, bombs. Tizzard understood that the war wouldn't be won by the country with the smartest scientists, but by the one capable of manufacturing the future at scale. Britain had the ideas. America had the factories. Only together could they defeat Germany. Yet the decision was still dangerous. Handing over the magnetron was like handing over the crown jewels. Some British branch officials feared the United States might take the technology and distance itself politically. Others worried about leaks. If the magnetron fell into German hands, the consequences would be catastrophic. But Tizzard dismissed the fear. He believed that hoarding knowledge in a moment of national collapse was not patriotism, it was suicide. He trusted the Americans would see the value of partnership. He trusted open scientific collaboration more than secrecy. And above all, he trusted his own calculations. In preparation for the mission, Tizzard personally oversaw every detail. He selected the team, reviewed every document, and rehearsed the arguments he would use in Washington. He wasn't a salesman, he wasn't a general. He was a scientist, preparing to make the most important pitch in the history of warfare. His mission was not diplomacy, it was strategic engineering on a geopolitical scale. Before departure, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Everything Britain had developed, its greatest inventions, its most guarded military secrets, now rested in a single suitcase. He understood the weight of it more than anyone. If his gamble failed, Britain would collapse. If it succeeded, the Axis powers would face a technological storm unlike anything they had ever imagined. As he closed the suitcase and prepared to board the aircraft to North America, one thought lingered in his mind. Britain had always fought with courage, but this time courage was not enough. Science would have to save it. But would America accept the offer? Or would Tizzard arrive with the greatest gift of the war, only to watch it die in silence? Washington, D.C., September 1940. The city felt strangely calm compared to London's nightly infernos. No sirens, no blackout curtains, no bombs. For Henry Tizzard, the silence was almost unsettling. He had flown across the Atlantic, carrying the most valuable suitcase of the war. And now he had to convince a country that wasn't even at war to accept it. America was still officially neutral. Its politics were divided. Its population wanted no part of Europe's bloodshed. And yet, this was the only place on Earth that could turn Britain's fragile scientific miracles into weapons powerful enough to stop the Axis powers. Tizzard's arrival was quiet. No parades, no headlines. The Americans had no idea who he was. To them, he looked like a polite academic, not a man carrying technology that would shape the outcome of the Second World War. But inside government offices, a handful of military officials and scientists waited with curiosity. They had seen British visitors before, diplomats, officers, advisors, but never a scientific delegation offering full transparency. No one expected what Tizzard was about to reveal. The first meeting took place at the National Defense Research Committee, chaired by Vannevar Bush, a man whose influence in American science rivaled Tizard's own. Tizzard walked in calmly, placed the black suitcase on the table, and opened it. Silence followed. Bush leaned in. American scientists moved closer. What they saw inside stunned them. The cavity magnetron, small, copper-coloured, unassuming, left the Americans speechless. Their own radar research lagged behind by years. They had never imagined a device capable of producing microwaves this powerful, this stable, this compact. The Americans looked at it the way generals look at maps of victory. Tizzard explained its output, its capabilities, and its potential. He spoke plainly, without exaggeration. And yet the implications were staggering. With this device, radar could fit inside aircraft. Night interception, submarine hunting, long-range navigation. Everything would change. Then came the blueprints, technical papers, experimental data, radar networks, jet propulsion studies, early nuclear research. Bush realized almost immediately that Britain had just delivered the scientific equivalent of an entire weapons factory in a suitcase. No one had expected this level of openness. Tizzard wasn't negotiating. He wasn't hiding anything. He was placing Britain's survival in America's hands, without hesitation. The Americans reacted with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. They had expected guarded cooperation, not full disclosure. In fact, some officials were so surprised that they suspected a trick. Why would Britain give away the crown jewels of its defence technology? Why trust a nation that had not yet committed to the war? Tizzard gave them the same answer he had given the War Office in London. Because winning is more important than ownership. Bush understood immediately. This wasn't diplomacy. This was strategy. The purest kind of strategy, driven by mathematics, physics, and cold logic. The moment America grasped what it had been given, the mission transformed. Meetings grew larger. Doors that were normally closed opened for Tizzard's team. Navy officers, Air Corps engineers, and industrial leaders demanded to see the magnetron. Some handled it as if it might explode. Others stared at it like an artifact from another world. One American engineer famously said, "This is worth more than if you had sent us an entire battleship." The Tizard mission moved rapidly after that. American factories such as Bell Labs, Western Electric, and MIT Radiation Laboratory began planning immediate production. Within weeks, the magnetron moved from British prototype to American mass manufacturing. Hundreds of units were being designed, tested, improved, and prepared for deployment. Radar would soon appear on aircraft, ships, submarines, and coastal defences. It would become one of the most important weapons of the entire war. And it started with one suitcase and one scientist, willing to risk everything. But Tizzard didn't stop at radar. He met with NACA for discussions on jet technology. He visited naval laboratories to coordinate ASW improvements. He exchanged nuclear research notes with American physicists who were shocked by how far Britain had gone. Tizzard was not just handing over information. He was building a scientific alliance. And unlike political alliances, this one was based entirely on trust and competence. Not everyone in Washington supported the mission. Some officers resented that Britain had leapt ahead technologically. Others feared escalating America's involvement in the conflict. And isolationists within Congress argued that accepting British secrets would pull the United States into war. But scientific momentum is a force no committee can stop. Once American engineers saw the magnetron, the debate was over. They wanted to build it, refine it, and use it. In laboratories across the country, the Tizard mission ignited a wave of innovation that would reshape the war effort. Behind the scenes, something else was happening. something Tizard had predicted long before he boarded the plane. American scientists began working with British researchers as if they were one team. Ideas flowed freely. Technical barriers dissolved. The walls between nations collapsed in the face of shared purpose. A partnership was born, not from treaties, but from equations. By the end of 1940, the United States was producing technology that Britain had invented but could never have built alone. The relationship would go on to power radar, sonar, aircraft upgrades, and eventually the Manhattan Project. The axis of scientific power had shifted. The Allies had gained a unified technological edge Germany could not match. Before continuing the story, if you appreciate deep dive documentaries about forgotten engineers and scientists who shaped the war, make sure to like and subscribe. It helps the channel bring more hidden stories to life. Tizzard had succeeded beyond imagination, but a dangerous question now hovered over the mission. Had he just saved Britain? Or had he given away the very secrets that would make America the new scientific superpower of the world? By early 1941, the effects of the Tizard mission were no longer theoretical. They were transforming the battlefield in real time. American industry absorbed British science with astonishing speed. Laboratories that had once struggled with low-power radar suddenly operated with a device more advanced than anything Germany possessed. Workshops expanded, factories retooled, and in a matter of months, the technology Britain had carried across the Atlantic was being mass-produced at a scale the world had never seen before. The first proof of success came from the sky. American-built magnetrons paired with British radar expertise led to the creation of compact airborne radar systems. No longer confined to large ground stations, radar now flew inside aircraft, a turning point so significant that it rewrote the logic of air warfare. RAF night fighters could detect German bombers in the darkness. Coastal patrol planes could spot U-boats attempting to hide on the ocean surface. For the first time in the war, the Allies had eyes where the human eye could not see. Germany felt the consequences immediately. During the Blitz, Luftwaffe crews relied on darkness to shield their bombing raids. But as radar-equipped British fighters patrolled the night sky, German losses increased. The Luftwaffe had no answer. Their radar programs lagged behind. Their magnetron technology was years behind, and their aircraft were not designed for electronic warfare. Engineers in Berlin were shocked when they finally understood the scale of the Allied advantage. It wasn't just that Britain survived the Blitz. It was that British science had now leapt forward with American power behind it. At sea, the impact was just as dramatic. The Atlantic battlefield, once dominated by U-boats, began to shift. Radar-equipped patrol aircraft detected submarines long before they reached convoy lanes. Escort ships, guided by advanced ASDIC systems and improved depth charges, countered attacks with new precision. Wolfpack tactics became riskier. The ocean, while once the graveyard of Allied shipping, turned into a battleground where U-boats could no longer hide. The technological gap was widening, and Germany could feel it closing around them. Meanwhile, Tizzard watched from Britain as news of progress crossed the Atlantic. For him, this was the validation of everything he had fought for. A collaboration where British science and American industry acted as one. While military leaders debated strategies and politicians shaped alliances, it was engineers who were actually winning the war. Factories built radar sets by the thousands. Research centres expanded the magnetron's capabilities. And American teams, inspired by British breakthroughs, began pushing boundaries even further. The cooperation created a ripple effect across the war effort. Better radar meant safer convoys. Safer convoys meant more supplies. More supplies meant more aircraft, more ships, more weapons, a chain. Reaction of production that Germany could not match. The Luftwaffe, once feared as unstoppable, now faced a world where Allied pilots saw them first. On the Eastern Front, the USSR struggled alone, but future American aid, made possible by secure Atlantic shipping, would soon flow in massive quantities. Everywhere the war turned, the underlying reason remained the same. Allied technology was rising faster than Axis armies could adapt. Behind closed doors, American scientists were especially interested in the most sensitive part of the Tizard suitcase, the early nuclear research from tube alloys. Although Britain had not handed over a full atomic blueprint, it had provided enough to prove that the concept was real and urgent. American physicists recognized immediately that an atomic bomb was no longer theoretical. It was possible. And the nation with the largest industrial base on Earth was now racing to achieve it. Tizzard did not intend to start the Manhattan Project, but his mission helped light that fuse. Across 1941 and 1942, scientific collaboration deepened. American laboratories often wrote directly to British research teams. Engineers from both nations exchanged equations, test data, component designs, and field results. A transatlantic scientific alliance was forming, one more powerful than any military treaty. It was not based on politics or speeches. It was based on physics, mathematics, and shared purpose. But while the technologies grew stronger, a strange paradox emerged. Britain, the nation that had created the magnetron and invented the first radar network, soon found itself overshadowed by the scale of American production. The United States, Mafaculates, could build in months what Britain could not build in years. Tizzard had predicted this outcome. But even he hadn't imagined how quickly it would happen. America became the engine of Allied science, and as it did, Britain's inventions became global projects rather than national secrets. Some British officials resented this shift. They feared Britain had traded scientific supremacy for survival. But Tizzard saw things differently. He didn't care about ownership, he cared about output. And the output was undeniable. Radar in the skies, radar on ships, radar in bombers, radar everywhere the war demanded it. His gamble had reshaped the battlefield in every direction. Yet a deeper question lingered. Not for politicians, not for generals, but for historians who would one day look back on this moment. If the United States now possessed Britain's most powerful technologies and the industrial capability to expand them on an unimaginable scale, then what would happen when the war ended? Would this alliance remain a partnership? Or had Tizzard unknowingly handed the future of global science to a nation destined to become a superpower? And as the war escalated, one question became impossible to ignore. Had Tizzard saved the British Empire, or quietly transferred its scientific crown to America? When the Second World War finally shifted in the Allies' favour, most people credited armies, generals, and battlefield victories, bombing campaigns, naval escorts, armoured divisions. These became the accepted symbols of turning points. But inside government archives, in laboratories, and in the memory of the scientists who lived through it, the truth was quieter, sharper, and far more unsettling. The war had been changed by ideas, not armies, and many of those ideas came from one man, Henry Tizzard. Radar blanketed Allied skies. Airborne systems guided bombers, intercepted fighters, and hunted submarines. The magnetron had become the beating heart of wartime electronics, the backbone of radar labs across America. Jet propulsion research accelerated under US industry. And tube alloys, the early British nuclear notes, merged seamlessly into the colossal American project that would soon reshape the world. The Manhattan Project. Tizzard had not written the bomb, but he had nudged history toward the moment when it became real. Britain survived because of the science he fought to protect. But the world that emerged after 1945 looked nothing like the world Tizzard had known. His mission had transformed the United States from a nation on the sidelines into the most powerful scientific military engine in human history. American radar, American electronics, American nuclear capability. All built upon foundations that began in small British laboratories, with ideas Britain could never have industrialized alone. As the Cold War dawned, it became clear that the Tizard mission had done more than save Britain. It had shifted the centre of global scientific gravity. The United States became the leader in physics, aerospace, electronics, nuclear research, and defence technology. Britain, exhausted by war and weakened by economic strain, gradually receded from the cutting edge it had once dominated. And yet Tizzard never regretted his decision. He had chosen survival over pride, and survival had been the right choice. In the years that followed, Tizzard continued shaping British science policy. He championed evidence-based decision-making, pushed for coordinated research councils, and argued that a nation's power would be measured not only by its armies, but by its laboratories. He insisted that scientific independence required political independence, a lesson Britain would learn again and again in the decades to come. But despite his influence, he never became a household name. Scientists knew him, historians respected him, governments listened to him, but the public never understood how profoundly their world had been shaped by the quiet man who once carried a black suitcase through Washington. His legacy lives not in statues or speeches, but in technologies that define the modern era: radar networks, jet aircraft, microwave systems, nuclear research, airborne detection, electronic warfare. These innovations became the foundation of Allied victory and the foundation of global power for generations. Tizzard never fired a shot, but he changed the trajectory of the war more decisively than many generals whose names fill history books. Today, when we talk about the scientific age, about the digital battlefield, about nations competing with ideas rather than borders, we are living in the world Tizzard predicted. He understood that the future would not belong to the country with the largest army. It would belong to the country with the most advanced mind. Yet that truth carries its own paradox. If Britain's survival required sharing every secret it had, then Britain also had to accept the consequence. It would no longer stand alone at the forefront of military science. Tizard's mission protected the Empire in 1940, but it also signalled the rise of a new global superpower. Henry Tizzard never considered himself a hero. He was a pragmatist, a strategist, a scientist who trusted equations more than politics. But history remembers him differently. He may not have commanded armies, but he armed them with the tools they needed to survive. He may not have led nations, but he united them with the one thing stronger than borders: knowledge. One man, one suitcase, one gamble that reshaped the war, the alliance, and the future of global power. But in giving everything to save Britain, did Henry Tizzard strengthen his country, or quietly ensure that the next century would belong to someone else?